To get to the Fisher cut bait question of the evening, what do you see in your crystal ball? What is going to happen with the economy, not just in Texas, but in terms of the United States here in the next 18 months or so?
Well, I've got a lie infection, so my crystal ball's not real clear tonight, but I'll do the best I can. I'm not contagious, don't worry about it. The U.S. economy is growing. You hear all this thing, are we going to double dip? No, we're not. If you look at where, people are worried about the slow growth, and we should be concerned about it. We're not growing as much as we need to. We're not sustaining the things we need to sustain. But if you go back and think about 2 years ago today was the day the Dow went below 10,000 for the first time in 4 or 5 years. Go back earlier in the week, and you got the anniversary of the market falling 777 points in one day. Go back to last week, and you've got the 2-year anniversary of AIG's collapse. Go back a week before that, and you've got the 2-year anniversary of Lehman Brothers collapse. We were on the brink of some really, really, really bad stuff 2 years ago. And we have stepped back from that brink really pretty remarkably. If you stop and think about it, we're growing. We're not growing rapidly enough to see a lot of the things we would like to see. For example, we're seeing some job creation. We'll get some numbers tomorrow. They'll probably up there a little bit or down a little bit. They're not going to be anything to write home about in all likelihood. But we're not bringing the unemployment rate down, even though we have been gaining some jobs. And why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one is because our population grows and our labor force grows, we have to create 100,000 jobs a month just to keep up with the workforce growth. In other words, if we kept creating 100,000 jobs every month, the unemployment rate would never go down. That would just be equal. It would jump around statistically, but
be a wash.
The trend, it would be a wash, absolutely. The other thing is, to be counted as unemployed, you have to be looking for work. Well, about 3 million people gave up during this deal. Well, as they start seeing a few jobs creating things a little better, what happens? They come back into the workforce. They start looking again. So we might create 200,000 or 300,000 jobs in a month, and nothing happens to the unemployment rate. And that's very bad for politicians because that's the indicator everybody looks at, the unemployment rate.
Well, and there's also the question of underemployment because a lot of companies have converted full-time positions to part-time positions. Right. They don't have to take care of benefits, worry about health insurance with a part-timer. So we got a lot of people working, but they're working 2 or 3 jobs to take care of the one they used to have.
Exactly. And if you add up the people who are significantly underemployed, that is, they have a master's degree in rocket science and they're driving a cab or something. I mean, if you take the ones that are really, really significantly underemployed, plus the ones that have dropped out, plus the ones that are counted unemployed, and you do the math, the unemployment rate in this country is about 16%.
16%.
And when that's the case, you can't have a lot of increase in consumer spending, because 1 out of every 6 households doesn't have their primary breadwinner doing what they should be doing.
You mentioned the politicians a minute ago, and we're, by the way, be thinking of questions because we're going to have a microphone in the audience if you'd like to ask Dr. Perryman a question of your own. You mentioned this a minute ago, the elections. I don't know if you've heard, but there are elections coming up. Have you all heard that?
It's a rumor.
There's one coming up here in about 3 or 4 weeks. And I saw a poll the other day. It's not the war. We've been in Afghanistan 9 years, starting 10 today. It's not. The number one issue on every voter's mind is the economy. It's the economy, stupid.
Right.
And of course, you got several sides here now, and with some independent movement there too.
Right.
All addressing this. Is there any likelihood of change after this midterm election, regardless of who wins? Because it does seem like we're in a dynamic now that's almost like a feedback loop.
Yeah, we really are, and frankly, I don't think you'll see some huge policy changes anytime soon. I really don't, regardless of who wins, how the elections come out, and that sort of thing. I don't think you'll see any huge policy changes taking place right now because, frankly, the options are fairly limited at this point in time. A lot of people are concerned about deficits, and we should be concerned about deficits, but you can't be too concerned about it when 16% of the folks aren't working like they should. That's not the time to be squeezing things down.
George Soros the other day made the comment, I don't know that I agree with him on this, but it was an interesting comment. He goes, what we need right now is not virtue, it's stimulus.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in the virtue of stewardship and saving money. And
exactly.
I got 3 kids, I know how that is. But at the same time...
I'll give you a couple more if you want.
Well, no, I'd lease them. You mentioned the 16% and that number out there. So you have people who are pulling back, not spending as much. For a while, it looked like we were learning to live within our means, but then it turns out that maybe some of the credit card issues have changed because of defaults, not because we're spending less or charging less. It doesn't seem like we've gotten the message yet.
Well, I think we've gotten the message short term. I'll put it that way. I don't know that we've gotten the message long term. I mean, people are spending less right now, partially because of the employment situation, it's harder to get consumer credit than it was before, and that's certainly a big part of it. So people are spending less right now, and that's a good and bad thing. I mean, long term, we were clearly out of control before. On the other hand, as we're trying to get, as you said, stimulus going, what we need is stimulus. When the consumer is 65 to 70% of the economy, if they're not spending money, it's very hard to build a lot of momentum into this thing. The interesting thing will be, and David and I were talking about this at the dinner table, will people fundamentally change their habits once we get through this thing? And he said in his business, in the ministry business, he kind of learned that people normally that human nature didn't really change much over time, and basically most economic studies over history show us pretty much the same thing.
Raise your hand if your first hangover ever stopped you from getting a second.
Well, the first one of these over speculation bubbles we went through, at least that we're aware of, happened in 1637, and it's happened about every 10 years since then. So.
Yeah. Fear is such a big part of this, and I think it was Alan Greenspan who was talking about there's an undermining of the economy right now and the culture. And yet we have political leaders who seem hell-bent on just flooding each other to a pulp without addressing the issues. And that's understandable. They want to win and that sort of thing. But, how is this election going to affect the economy? What do you see the economy doing to the election? Let me put it that way. And then, where is the FDR who's going to step forward and say we have nothing to fear but fear itself? Because it seems like we play to our fears right now in order to achieve victory.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. A lot of people think FDR said that about World War II. He didn't. He said it about the Depression, and he said it in his 1936 inaugural address, which was well before the war. And he was talking about the economy. The biggest problem was when people are afraid, the tendency is to sit on the sidelines and do nothing. That's human nature. How you react to uncertainty is you just sit around and hope it gets better and don't do anything for a while. And right now we have uncertainty about the impacts of the health care reform. We have uncertainty about are we going to extend the tax cuts or are we not going to extend the tax cuts. There's uncertainty about how the election's going to come out and what the dynamic's going to be there. There's just a lot of uncertainty out there. And corporate America has been making some money lately, and they're sitting on $2 trillion worth of cash right now. But the key word there is sitting on it. And we have an economy that's built on people doing something, and when they do nothing, that makes it difficult. So just the fact that the election is over, every how it comes out, the fact that the election is over will minimize some of that uncertainty. And I think we'll get a little bit of impetus out of that. But clearly the election is being affected by the economy. I mean, it's a funny thing. The economy is always the number one issue when it's bad. And then if you do a really good job and fix it, it's not the number one issue anymore. You don't get much credit for it. But when it's bad, it's always the number one issue. And right now, this is going to be a brutal year for incumbents. Really, incumbents from both parties.
There's a throw the bums mood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's probably a worse year for Democrats than Republicans simply because there's more of them in power right now.
You've been called the most quoted man in Texas.
That is one of the things people said about
That's me. More. I mean, think about that. That means quoted more often than Willie.
Or maybe I quote him.
Or when so many people pay attention to what you say, you've got to be rather circumspect about what you say.
Oh, I've never been circumspect.
But really? Well, you do seem like a bit of an optimist, though. I mean, there's a lot of responsibility in people seeking your counsel and your wisdom.
Sure, absolutely. And I have an all-out obligation to call it like I see it. I am fundamentally optimistic about our economy. I mean, we have the most stable political system in the world, in this country. And I'll give you just a quick example. I don't want to get off on that, but let's do a quick one here. We had an election a couple of years ago. It was something like 53-47, pretty evenly divided in the country on a Tuesday. People were very passionate about it. And what did we do on Wednesday? Got up, went to work. 4 years before that, you flip 100,000 votes in Ohio and John Kerry's president. We all went to work on Wednesday. 4 years before that, the guy that got the most votes lost. You flip a few hundred votes in Florida and the other guy wins. It took 30 days for the Supreme Court to sort it out, and we all went to work on Wednesday. And it never occurs to us, if we don't like the results of an election, we're going to overthrow the government. And some of you are chuckling because it's that absurd to us. That's not a common thing. When you add that to our technology strength and a lot of other things, and you're fortunate here in Plano, you live in a very technology-oriented part of the state, part of the country. And America's true underlying strength is that we're good at the next big thing. That's what we do better than anybody else, is the next big thing.
Robert is going to move through the audience, so raise your hand if you have a question.
Sure,
We're going to
absolutely.
get to that. I want to ask you two questions before we get to this gentleman on the front row. Number one, Dallas-Fort Worth seems to be more shielded than the rest of the state, and certainly more than the rest of the nation. So what do you attribute that, and how can we ensure that we have that advantage in the future?
Well, Dallas-Fort Worth is fortunate in a lot of ways. It has diversity. It's the hub of a lot of economic activity. It's the market center of the Southwest, which is the fastest growing part of the country. It's the market center of the Southwest. It's the transportation center. It's the education center. And so you have a lot going for us there. The airport is a huge asset, and the role that the area plays in international trade is very important. There's a strong base of high growth industries here, technology oriented industries, and there's also a creativeness there of a lot of new companies starting up in some of those industries. You have good population growth here, and it comes from two sources. One is it's a fairly young population, so we have some kids. But the other one is in-migration. And a lot of the in-migration you get to the Metroplex is people who have just finished their education somewhere in the country, some other state paid for it, or some parent paid for it somewhere else, and they're looking around and they're saying, where do I want to come to seek my fortune? And they come here. And so basically we get to be a free rider just because it's a great place, perceived as a great place for opportunities.
About 10 years ago, I read a study that said by 2035, the primary language spoken in this part of the world will be Spanish. Demographics are what they are.
Right.
How is that going to affect the workforce in the future for my daughter, your kids? What is Texas economy going to look like in 20, 30, 35 years?
Well, it has some fundamental impacts, and it brings some great opportunities and some great challenges. The great opportunity it brings is, as the baby boomers age and retire, although we have high unemployment right now in this recession, fundamentally in the structure of this economy right now, we have a worker shortage. And in normal times, and we have a plentiful population of young people in Texas, and a lot of that's because of the Hispanic population, and that's a huge asset. The challenge is that asset has to be cultivated, and we have to invest in education, invest in breaking some of the cycles of poverty and dependence that have existed in some parts of the state for a long time. So it's probably the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity that we have here in Texas. One initiative that I know my wife on the coordinating board and her dear friend, and when they were mayors together for years and years, Florence Shapiro, who's not here tonight, anyway, have worked on a lot, is the whole idea of the Closing the Gaps initiative in Texas, of trying to get the matriculation rates and graduation rates up for Hispanics to the same level they are for other groups. If we can achieve that, we did a study for the Gates Foundation a couple of years ago. If we can achieve that over the next 15 or 20 years, it's worth 1 million jobs to the state.
1 million jobs.
1 million jobs. It's a huge, huge opportunity, but it's also something that has to be done in the context of limited social resources, budget deficits. It's not a simple thing to accomplish, but it's something that's very, very important. So it's both our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity.